Today we are talking about guides. And what do we mean by that? Well, when you find yourself in a place where you're exploring your own spirituality and what that means to you, or your religion, or things you've grown up with, or even memories from when you were young, often the word guides come up. I have a guide, or my higher self is guiding me, or you're just wondering, like, what does that even mean? What kind of guides are there? What do they do for us? How can we help them be better aligned with us? And that could be anything from angels to fairies, spiritual figures that were in life, in a human life at one point. Anyway, we're just diving deep on the guides because a lot of people just don't know or they question themselves about it. I thought it would be a good conversation. So, any insight from wise ones?
I'm going to need a guide for this. And I say that jokingly, but actually, I do feel like when we talk and when I am working in the metaphysical, that I do have a guide who gives me the words to say or gives me the inspiration. And some people might call that channeling too. Some people don't. It doesn't matter. I don't care. I just know that the words are not always mine because I wouldn't necessarily speak on that topic on my own with clarity. And so I know that sometimes I do have a guide who's there giving me the words to say, especially as I'm teaching and explaining things to students of spirituality and mediumship. And I know that somebody is kind of whispering in my ear. So I do feel like there are guides for different situations. I don't know that they're always necessarily vastly different guides. Like if there's 5,000 of them and everything we do, we have an individual guide for teaching. Here's one for helping you wash the dishes. I don't know that, but I don't feel like that's the case. I do feel like I have several whose energy are familiar to me, but I don't necessarily know or am familiar with every guide that I have. I just know that they're there.
Yeah, sometimes it's funny because I think people want like some kind of proof, like, oh, that's my guide. And so does our brain like make up what our guide looks like, get us comfortable? Or like you said, you don't really need it. Like I get the feeling when I'm gardening that I have like some of my loved ones in spirit. They're guiding me that may have gardened and I kind of suck at it with some plants. So what we assign as a human to what our guide looks like what we perceive our guides as, and is that the truth or is that something we imagine or does it even matter, you know?
I know that when I was first kind of exploring the metaphysical, I knew that there was a guide, and some people might think of them as guardian angel, somebody who's in charge of your team. Sometimes people refer to their spirit guides as a team, however you refer to it. But I felt like I had one guy who was in charge, and I just absolutely needed to know what he looked like and who he was, and where did he come from, and did he live a life here on earth, and all the questions. I probably wasted a year looking for that information when I could have just been feeling and knowing, you know what, he's there. I don't have to know all of those things to know that there is somebody guiding me. And I do feel like some people do find out that information about their guides, but I'm not actually bothered by it anymore. I don't mind if I don't know where he came from or who he's been or, what kind of life he lived on earth. I just know that he's there and that's enough. And I don't have to have the kind of human information about him. So I just want to let people know that you might have that information, but it's okay if you don't. You can just assign them a name in whatever way you want to call it. You can ask them to give you a name, but if you don't have one, just, call him Frank. It's okay.
Or Bob.
I like your story, Carol, the part about coming to the realization after a year of how you could have spent your energy, let's say, rather than trying to figure out who he is.
Yes.
Because belief or hope in something is what becomes your faith.
Uh-huh.
And then you no longer need proof. Those human details that we want are no longer required. So I remember growing up and, Granda passed, he suddenly joined my team. Nan passed, she was on the team, right? Anyone that passed over, they were suddenly joining my team. And of course, leading that team then at the time was God. And that was it. And then we'd say, God got thrown out the window at some stage, but actually I kept the family members around. And I even kept this concept of, let's say, the universe now guiding in some way. But what I've come to realize is it doesn't matter. Everything in spirit is one anyway. It's all
Mm-hmm.
connected, and irrespective of what you call it or what you feel it to be, it's there to support you on this human journey that you're on. And it's more the fact that you're reaching out in a sincere way, asking for support, that it's almost like they will fall over themselves to help you.
I like what you said about having your grandparents be guides for you, because people often wonder, can my family be my guides? Can my ancestors be my guides? My feeling is anybody can be your guide. Like you said, we're all connected and we're all joined together anyway in our physical, spiritual selves versus our non-physical spiritual selves. We're all connected. So I feel like it can be whoever. It can be a saint, it can be a religious figure, it can be family members, ancestors, whoever. I feel like anybody can lead you and guide you. Angels, fairies, like Tracy said. I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, I always see stuff like people maybe frame guides. A lot of the times, what I see is under ritualistic or religion, like, oh, saint, whoever, or somebody's really into angels and they'll connect with angels, and nature, they'll connect with the spirits of the trees and Mother Nature and all this. I find that like fascinating because that's their reality. So it's real, you know? So I think the question that kind of runs around in my head when I see people talking about guides, there's two things. It's like there are so many things we don't know. So I'm not one to poo poo that they're talking to the gnomes or fairies.
Mm-hmm.
Does it resonate with me? Well, I haven't experienced that in like my deep meditation or a gnome helping me garden. But now I'm going to, I bet you, because I can like wrap myself in the belief of that. And I feel like that's like the most important thing about guides is the energy and the belief and the trust you put into what you're experiencing. And that opens the door for wider things. And this world is so expansive with things we don't know or things we do know. So I kind of like there's all these things like the ascended masters and guardian angels, and the different archetypes will tell you a lot about the person too who's experiencing the guides that are there for them. But I think at the end of the day, I think we just like to empower people to know that whatever's real to you, it's a possibility, because there's a level that we can't prove in the human tangible sense that what you're experiencing is not true or it is true. The one caveat to guides that I have, and maybe this is something that I shouldn't judge either, but I don't really care for when other people try to tell people who their guides are. Like if a person's needing a human validation for what guide, oh, I see a little old lady and she's always pushing a pedaling cart and that's your guide. And then the person is like, oh, really? But maybe it's leading them down a different path. I feel like it is a personal journey for everybody to figure out what their guide means to them,
Mm-hmm.
but also not to judge themselves for whatever comes up. Because I remember having like a salamander as my guide. I would have never picked a salamander, but it showed up one of these days in my deep meditation. And if I think about my life when I was little, I would always find these little salamanders when I was a little kid, and I would take care of them and make sure they were protected. So, in my, makeup of who I am, it was pretty natural, but it also kind of delighted and surprised me in my meditation that now I put the archetype of the salamander as helping me on my journey, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just as
Mm-hmm.
funny as the fairies, I guess, but
But it's funny you say like somebody else doesn't need to tell you who they are, but they can actually validate your feelings. Because I remember sitting with you one time as we were sitting in trance, and I saw your salamander, but I called him a lizard. I didn't know the difference. And
yeah.
I thought, should I even say this? This is like, she's going to think it's so weird. And then you took it and you were like, oh, yeah, no, totally. I have that salamander
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
me. And I was so glad I said it. But then that's that kind of, you already knew it, but it's like the external validation
Yes,
as
I
well as
love
like
that.
you're not making that up. And so I don't mind it
Yeah.
in that sense. If somebody validates
Yeah.
what you already thought you knew, I think that's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I love that too. I do. That's great.
I did that another time. It was practicing with somebody else. And that was the exercises we were supposed to find or know who one of their guides might be. And I got the impression of a Buddhist monk. And I was like, oh, golly, that's like everybody has a Buddhist monk or a nun or the Chinese man. Like there's some common, typical guides that we come across in this world, but which makes sense because they were religious figures in their time too. But I almost didn't want to say it, but I did. And his eyes got really big, my partner, and he shows me a picture that he has drawn because he's an artist of who he thought his guide was, and it was the Buddhist monk in the orange robe that I had seen. And I was like, wow, that's really cool too, because it's validation for him, like somebody else is picking that up. But then even for myself going, okay, I could believe this. Now, it's like just more
Yeah.
validation from spirit, like
Yeah.
you're with us in whatever form. And just because I don't have a Buddhist monk as one of my guides, that doesn't mean somebody else doesn't.
Yeah, I love that.
I thought of something there a while ago, Tracy, when you were speaking, and that was, let's say, especially during teenage years and stuff, like the concept of angels, I threw out the window as well with organized religion and all of that, right? So certain beings were not permitted in my belief system then at the time. And like they had to be broken down, those beliefs. I had to almost grow and come to an understanding of which I am now, where, and geez, for someone to throw the Bible out and then quote it, it's like, but it's like with God, all things are possible.
Yeah.
And so that tells you nothing is off limits. And so now I try instead to be that, right? Nothing now is off limits. If an ascended master there wants to descend and have a chat, they're more than welcome. And that's not off limits.
Yeah.
If Michael wants to show up at Raphael, he can show up as well. But that's my point, that it's almost like nothing will happen, let's say, if you have the belief that something isn't possible.
Yeah.
But I am of the belief that you might cut yourself off from it.
Yeah.
And the reason I give that example is because I want people to understand, even ourselves, we're constantly growing, right? Our beliefs and our understanding is constantly evolving. So, like, something we say is not set in stone, and we don't live that way either. So even when we say something today and we have an understanding of guides or beliefs, we're open to that evolving, and we almost expect it to evolve because we're living and evolving with it. So I just think that's an important point to mention as well.
So you guys have both mentioned ascended masters and archangels, and I'm not sure everybody here listening would understand what either of those terms means. Do you guys want to elaborate?
Well, ascended masters are basically like human like, but they've kind of transcended the human life into like Buddha. Like now it's like a figure of spirituality, their higher knowledge when they were on earth, maybe, and people looked to them a certain way. Even Jesus, I would say, would be an ascended master. Things like that are ascended masters. I always like saw my grandma as my guardian angel, and maybe because I grew up Catholic, when she died, there was like a little prayer card for her, and it was the saint that was holding the girl's hand walking across the bridge. It was like a guardian angel. So she died when I was 6, and I always saw her as my guardian angel. And then there's like animal spirit guides, which are like symbolic more. At least some people describe it this way, like symbolic of whatever the animal traits are, and they walk with them, like my salamander. I'm not sure what my salamander is symbolic of, but he always made me feel good when I was little, having the salamanders around, and they kind of just are in the shadows. And I was kind of like that, very observant of things around me, but nobody really saw me. So animal guides can be like more totem like in my experience from what people describe. The wise owl, which actually, guys, did you know owls are really one of the more dumb birds? So I don't, that's just a random side note. So yeah, but stuff like that. But they do see a lot from high above. So maybe that's the wisdom.
Tracy,
Yeah.
just so you know, salamanders can represent fire and transformation.
Oh, that makes sense because that's my entire life every other week. So thanks.
On your question, Carl, so I think anyone of certain religions will know archangels, right? And that's only my understanding as well as, let's say, coming from Catholic background. But as well, I will say if anyone hears terms or words, they're like, Google them, explore it. That's your cue to almost be the child, be curious,
Mm-hmm.
and delve deeper into it, you know. But as for the Ascended Masters, then I feel that they are souls who have had the human experience and then completed it. So they have, as I say, they've woken up, they have had their awakening while in the human form. So Jesus is very much an Ascended Master. Oh, by the way, like there's male, female, they're all there. And my understanding is their goal is simply to help humanity for every soul to get to that state, to get to the ascended state. And then all the ascended masters, when they lived, if you go and look at all their words, you know, provided it wasn't distorted, like many of them were, they will actually all point to the same thing. So, for example, I remember reading the Tao, and like the words in that are very much the same as what Jesus said, and yet they were written 500 years before Jesus was born. So these aren't secrets, they're not being withheld from humanity. We have free will whether we listen to them and get back to that ascended state or not. That's the whole journey, that's the experience, in my opinion.
It's always going to be our opinion, right? We're never going to know all of the things.
But we're open for that then to grow and evolve, right? So that's what I'm saying. I
Mhm.
didn't have all of that understanding 20 years ago, 10 years ago. But every time I get a little piece of information, more and more trickles through in a sense. And then I come to a greater understanding. And even with that, I'm open to more.
Mhm. And I feel like our guides are the ones who push us into those different directions, because if you're not changing throughout your life and even changing your mind, changing your opinions, then are you really growing? Are you really having that experience that they want us to have? So I do feel like we have, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Life coaches, guides who put things in our way, like this book that for you to read or this conversation to be had or whatever it is, in always helping us grow and evolve. So I feel like guides and angels, if you will, are active in our lives, even if we don't know it or realize it all of the time.
Mhm. Let's talk about for the audience, it's funny because, like, if you're meditating or if you're thinking about who your guide is, put it out. You can ask for a guide to help you with something, is my point. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you feel like you need more strength in something or whatever, send me a guide. Ask the universe. Just put it out there in your head or out loud, and then just kind of be open to what comes in, you know, because that's a good way to kind of get maybe like a picture in your head of who it is or what it is as a guide, and then that helps feel supported. I think guides a lot of times just kind of makes you feel supported. Some people don't need to know who it is or their face or what they're wearing or anything like that, but sometimes it helps people to feel like, oh, I saw my guide. It was, you know, this philosopher guy, and it makes me feel supported when I'm writing poetry. Like, you know, I like to do that kind of thing. And I just want people to know you can ask for a guide for your what your needs are, and then just kind of delight in what shows up. So that's kind of fun. And the other thing I wanted to say is when I was kind of going down the rabbit hole of like, who are all my guides? Now I'm of the belief that the universe as a whole is kind of a guide and I can call in whatever I need. I do have a feeling that I have a main guy that hangs by me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's cool that you can call in what your needs are, but when I was exploring all this, I wanted to know, like, oh, well, were they living in life and whatever? And I did, through meditation, get a name and a date, and it was an actual person. So you can prove that to yourself. I guess my soul needed to know that, so I felt like it was real, but it doesn't mean it wasn't real when it's my salamander either. So there's just so many varieties of things you can do and feel supported and get the feedback and get the help from the universe.
And you don't always have to see them. You can feel them. No, just feel that there's a presence that's more than just you who's there, and know that you are being guided. Your guide is guiding you. They are there. I'm just saying that because it doesn't have to be that you can see them physically or just know what their name is and that kind of thing. You can just kind of have that sense of peace and know that that peace, that energy is coming from your guides. whoever they are.
Tracy, I was laughing in my head when you were speaking because I was like, how many times do I joke with G and say, when you come back in the next life, I'm not coming back with you, I'm staying behind and I'll be your guide on the other side. Also, Tracy, one other thought that popped into my head when you were speaking was if there's one I can recommend for everyone to turn to, it is themselves, their higher self, because that is your divine director of your life.
Yep.
When shit happens that you don't like, that your ego doesn't like, I can guarantee you your soul is bursting with joy
Mm-hmm.
because it wants the growth, it wants the evolution. And it's almost like, so whether we like it or not, our higher self is guiding our experience, our life, because that's the one that knows all, right? That's the one that is still connected to the source.
Yeah.
So it is there for you throughout your entire life, and you can turn to that at any time. When a child doesn't understand something, they talk to themselves and they ask questions. And suddenly, in talking to themselves and asking questions, they also speak the answers to themselves. And it's suddenly the realization, who do you think is speaking back to the child? Their higher self. I was like, that is so simple and perfect. It's entrusting that it's there because it's always guiding you, it always has been. And that is the one guide that you can always count on. And there will be others, I've no doubt that there's others, whether they're sending light, love, hope, whatever it might be. But I'm like, even if you need that, you can still trust in that it was your higher self that still channeled that to you from them or whatever you want.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
What about Carol? I've heard you talk about before star seeds and star beings. Like, I think with all the things, the universe being so expansive and people kind of opening up to the idea of that, not just like what on the ground is expansive and animals and everything else, but now looking towards the sky and the stars. You hear a lot about star beings and star guides. There's a lot of talk around that. So that's a possibility too. Just endless. Do you have any thoughts on that, Carol?
Well, I feel like star seeds, like you're saying, it's people who were sent to be guides on Earth, basically, but in a human form. So they don't necessarily know when they're born that, oh, I was sent here for a specific purpose. But I do feel like there is a purpose that they're meant to have that is one to help lead others to spirituality and to having this hope and believing in the universal truth that we're all one. So to me, that's what a starseed is. It's somebody who's been given kind of the specific task, but then they're sent to live as a human. And like I said, they don't necessarily know that that's their task, but I feel like that's one of their divine purposes, in addition to the purpose they have to live the human experience. They've just got kind of a little extra tagged on there, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Yeah.
I feel like it's nice to categorize things if it makes sense to you, but I feel like essentially we're all like a star seed and we all kind of have a purpose and a thought to lead to some direction because your whole life journey is a spiritual journey, whether you acknowledge it or not. We're all in the oneness. So I just think, maybe the stars and the planets appeal to some people over others, or they can frame that in their mind, just like any guide, like my salamander or my guardian angel for my grandmother, or it's whatever makes sense to you. And there are no rules. But I know the star beings have been a hot topic as of late. But I think it's just, like you said, another way to frame it. Like when I first was hanging out with you, Carol, you were like, I have guides and they're all named Bob. That just makes sense for me. Like there's one, but there's probably a million, but I'm just calling them all Bob because I can't be bothered with trying to figure out who's for what, And I think it's just that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's evolved for you in different ways and different experiences. And I feel like it's the same way with people that see green monsters, star beings, fairies, salamanders, philosophers, Jesus Christ, whoever.
There's so much more than the human intellect can understand or contemplate.
Uh-huh.
I was also thinking when you were speaking of the star seeds,
Uh-huh.
I try not to judge anything in the world because if we're going to be like spirit, everything in spirit is perfect. So anything we see here that's an imperfection is human created. Like, in other words, the human is looking at it and judging something to be imperfect. So as you said there about the star seeds, if you go and look at all of the destruction and the suffering that certain souls might have inflicted on other people, that's a judgment we make from our human understanding. But we have no idea that perhaps that soul volunteered to have a particular life, like you said, and maybe this wasn't the enlightened life. This was the life of suffering, of pain, of destruction, and doing that in a sense to cause more souls to almost look back towards the light. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's like that star seed. It's not just what we see as the good. We can also look at the bad or what we see as bad, but actually it's not bad, because in everything there is goodness that is trying to lead everyone back to where we were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's leading people to their inner divineness.
And maybe we sometimes need the experience of what's not in spirit to learn that.
It might look differently than we expect it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
It's the difference, like a while ago, when I said the ego wanting one thing, but your higher self knowing better.
Mm-hmm.
Learning to trust in that.
Right. Kids want ice cream for dinner, but mom knows better, so we have to listen to mom.
I always say the truth is more exciting than we think.
Yeah, I love it. I think that spirit guides or guides ultimately, like Anthony was saying, come from source, universe, and your higher self is infinite wisdom unfolding, and so I think it's really cool because we don't understand everything out there, but the universe is infinite. So our guide can be anything. And I like what you both said about not judging what it is, because when we just come at things with curiosity, our guides included, it just unfolds to beautiful, magical things. And if we want to have a garden gnome and a salamander as our guide, that's awesome. Equally, if Jesus is your guide, that's awesome too. But, or a little star being somewhere, it doesn't matter. And I think that the more we can trust our higher self and open up to be curious about what comes through, then we can have our own experiences that make sense for us. So I just kind of like this rabbit hole discussion. Thanks for engaging. So if you have any thoughts after you listen to this episode, we'd love to hear them. So find us on our socials, send us an email, give us some feedback on episodes you want to hear, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Slán.
Bye.
I'm not joking. I thought that this whole episode was on Buzzwords 2 until we discovered we lost Buzzwords 1. Then Tracy went with guides, and I was thinking, Mother Jesus, what am I going to say about this topic? And I said to you before we started, if you could see the books I'm surrounded with at my desk, and it's literally about ascended masters, my higher self. No joke. There's even mentions of light beings, the whole fucking shebang.
Yay, I love it.
And I was like, I actually couldn't have planned her coming up with that topic. That look in Tao.
Oh yeah, I love the Tao.